I want to talk about academia. I touched on this in the change rant, but I want to come back to it because there's some things I want to emphasize and expand on. There's this notion by non-academics that you go to school, you get a higher level of education, and what happens is the checklist of facts that you know just increases, and that's it. And what those people don't understand is it's about how do you use an increased list of facts to progress it forward. You go study history, right? So you can learn how to identify when history is repeating itself. You go learn equations in a field of science so that you can apply them to get new equations. It's all about the application and it's all about the process. This applies on two scales, right? The small scale and the big scale. The small scale is like within a single piece of research, right? When I write a paper based on some analysis I did, based on some experiment I did, how do you set that up to not have bias? Meaning anything that skews your data that would affect your analysis of it. If your research has some kind of identifiable bias, and you submit it to a scientific journal, it's most likely not going to get accepted because of the peer review process where you have 3 to 4 experts in your field review your paper and make sure it doesn't have bias or make sure it makes sense or make sure that your research is as valuable as it can be. But now it does happen sometimes because, and I'll talk about consensus in a minute, if we have a new prevailing consensus that an old thing we thought was wrong, we have to go back and look at all of the pieces of research that say that the old theory was correct and say, well, these are actually wrong because of this bias we didn't know about. But it also teaches you how to analyze your results, how to discuss the implications of your results, and how to think about the mechanisms and process that led to your result. When people who outside academia say that college radicalizes people, they go and they get brainwashed by the left. There's 2 big reasons for that. First of all, it's not that you get radicalized by the left and then you start thinking these things. It's that the left tends to base their beliefs in evidence. And when new evidence comes up that says that the thing you're thinking is wrong, you change to adjust based on all the evidence. And the other reason is the left employs the same tactics of approaching problems that academia does, which is you think about the mechanisms that are causing something to happen instead of just saying, well, this happens, what do we do about it? Right? An example is crime, and you can look at the rant I have on statistics. Conservatives think crime is just going to happen, so we need more police to get rid of crime because we need to scare people into submission. We need to oppress people more. But the left says, what are the things that cause crime to happen? When you lower the poverty rate, you lower the crime rate. On the bigger scale, higher levels of education teach you how do we come to a consensus. What do I mean when I say the scientific consensus? It's not like one new paper pops up and says, oh yeah, guys, guess what? That thing we used to think, it's actually not true. And then everyone goes, okay, that's the new consensus. Good job, everyone. We did it. That paper comes up and then people say, how else could we test this? What analysis could we perform to test this? How does this theory make sense if we have all these past studies that justify the old theory? What makes those experiments wrong? We come to a consensus by continuously challenging this new idea and thinking about it in new ways. And if it stands all these challenges, then it becomes the consensus. So when I hear people who are like, oh, I'm a wolf and you're a sheep because you just listen to what the so-called experts tell you to listen to. You just do what they say. I challenge it. I listen to Joe Rogan and I Google stuff until I find what I'm looking for. What they're not understanding is that they are far from the first group of people to challenge this, right? If we have a consensus, it's because the experts have been challenging it for a long time, and they're doing it in ways that those people who are not experts in that field could not possibly understand. It's not because you're stupid. It's not because you don't know how to think critically. It's because these people are experts. They have spent their entire careers studying these things and challenging these things in the hopes that they can adjust the course of science. They're trying to say that it's wrong, not because they don't like the science, but because, first of all, that gives you some level of fame, which is going to lead to more funding for your research. But second of all, it's because, as I stated in the change rant, the most important scientists are the ones who significantly change the course of a field of study. And an important point I want to mention about consensus is that scientific consensus does not necessarily mean it's 100% fact. The scientific consensus can change over time because we collect new data that says that the old way of thinking was not correct. And so when I see like Charlie Kirk at a college campus, I saw this video where a kid comes up and says, I'm an economics major. And Charlie Kirk says, oh, you must have read this book. You must know the exact economic situation of this country. Still, he thinks the traditional view of education, which is you go to school, teacher writes some things on the board, you memorize them, and then you regurgitate them on the test. Right? And it's because Charlie Kirk does not understand you, what higher levels of education are supposed to give you. I could have two people taking the same classes at the same exact time with the same teachers, get their bachelor's, master's, and PhD together. Maybe they even work on the same or a similar research topic. And they would come out of that having retained different information, not because one is wrong or the other's PhD is more valuable or valid than the other, but because our experiences and our brains are different and they lead us to retain and recall information differently. And on top of that, Charlie Kirk goes to these universities and he's challenging kids who are part of the way through getting a bachelor's, the lowest degree that's concentrated in a field of study you can possibly get besides an associate's, right? Ask anyone who's gotten a master's or higher. Getting your bachelor's is enough to make you think you're hot shit, to make you think that you know a lot about this field, right? And granted, you do know more than the typical population in this field. When you get your master's, you learn enough to know just how much you don't know. You learn enough to get overwhelmed. And then in your PhD, you say, oh, wow, there's so much shit. I just need to pick one topic. I need to laser focus on that topic, take it all the way to the edge, to the cutting edge of the research so that I can take it to the next step. So quizzing these kids who are partway through getting a bachelor's, which is far from making them representative of what academia gives you, is totally missing the point. On top of missing the fact that it's not about the list of facts, it's about the processes, the way you set up your mind to critically think about things. Charlie Kirk would also have you believe that college is a scam, because look at how many people get degrees, get a college degree, and then eventually start working in a field that has nothing to do with the major they got. And he'd be like, see, it's a scam. You go learn about this thing and then you work in something else. First of all, I agree with the notion that college is too expensive. And I agree that it should be free, right? So that way it can't be a scam if it's free. Good idea, Charlie. But second of all, halfway through getting a bachelor's, you may take, I don't know, 2 to 4 maybe classes in your major that are higher than an introductory level. The rest of the classes you're taking are introductions to a variety of topics, right? That's a general education requirement. I was an astrophysics major in undergrad, and I took a music theory class my freshman year. That planted a seed in me of something that I want to come back to later. I just didn't know if I wanted it to be my full degree. It teaches you about yourself by teaching you about the world around you. I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be taking advice about college or higher levels of education from someone who doesn't have a higher level of education. Maybe go take a couple of college courses and see what you think about them. What you're going to find is everything they teach you in college courses is evidence-based. We have scientific consensus because we have evidence. And that's what academia teaches you, and it teaches you to change your mind when you're presented with better evidence.